And Republicans today, I'm confident, will be unified in delivering, as President Trump calls it, one big, beautiful bill for the American people. But what does this bill include? The fiscal year 2025 budget resolution fulfills promises to secure America's borders, increase our national defense, unleash our energy potential, and finally start to get our house in order. I agree completely with my colleague. We have got to reduce our spending, and this bill contains a target with a minimum floor of $2 trillion in spending reduction in our federal budget. Importantly, it also lays the groundwork to make permanent and build on the 2017 Trump tax cuts so that American families can keep more of their hard-earned money to stop financing Washington's spending problem. Our conference is united in preventing an over $4 trillion tax hike on American families and businesses and delivering additional tax relief to those who have suffered for 4 years now under inflation. We are united in making this proven tax policy permanent to provide the certainty that businesses need to make long-term investments that drive growth and stability for our families as they save and plan for the future. We're also unified in our resolve to restore fiscal sanity and know that the best way to do so isn't to tax hardworking Americans more. It is to spend less. While many tend to focus on the policy disagreements that occur, as they should in these halls, the reality is that Republicans are completely unified in delivering on President Trump's agenda, a major portion of which is to restore the economic prosperity experienced under his previous presidency. Let's just look back for a minute about the bill that we are trying to extend and make permanent now. Most Americans don't pay attention to the minutiae of tax policy. But if you ask them, the majority will tell you that they'd rather keep more of their money than let the government spend it. And that's exactly what the 2017 tax cuts did. Those Trump tax cuts lowered tax rates for the overwhelming majority of Americans, simplified the tax code, and encouraged companies to do business in the United States instead of abroad. In addition to lowering rates across the board, it provided targeted tax relief to the middle-class working families by doubling the standard deduction and the child tax credit, and to small businesses by providing a new 20% deduction, enabling America's entrepreneurs to create new jobs, increase workers' wages, and reinvest in their business. The majority of the benefits from the Trump tax cuts, contrary to what you've heard all day from the other side, flowed to working middle-class families, the bottom 50% of earners receiving the largest reduction in average tax rates at 17.3%. Contrary to the claims that you've heard all day on the floor today that benefits were only for billionaires and corporations, the Trump tax cuts actually made the tax code even more progressive, meaning that the highest income earners today pay a greater share of all taxes than they did before. And if we can extend this tax cut, that will continue to be the case. The generational reforms we made in 2017 were designed to strengthen investment, boost economic growth, increase take-home pay, reduce poverty, and make America strong, and it worked. Not only did taxpayers keep more of their hard-earned money, but a growing economy powered median household to an all-income to an all-time high. The labor market improved. Workers saw record wage growth, and the unemployment rate fell dramatically to 3.5%, the lowest in 50 years. And the lowest income workers experienced the largest wage growth. There was capital formation explosion in the United States, and corporate inversions, corporations leaving America, stopped and became a thing of the past as companies came back home to America and became the place to form capital and do business again. All Americans reap the benefits of a booming economy. Extending this current proven tax policy and building on it is the best way to restore economic prosperity and opportunity for working families, many of whom are struggling to recover from the historic inflation of the last 4 years. Tonight, I expect we'll hear once again the politics of fear, as my Democrat colleagues claim all sorts of dire things that will happen, including that we're just going to cut taxes for the wealthy so that we can do our own projects and benefit the wealthy and corporations. This attack has been used for nearly a decade, and it's just as false now as it has been in the past. Americans should not be scared by these falsehoods. What they should be alarmed by is what my colleagues and I are committed to preventing: the largest tax hike in history that will occur if we do not extend the current Trump tax cuts. This chart shows, of all these dollars of tax relief that we are talking about, contrary to the argument that they go to the wealthy, $2.6 trillion of this tax hike goes to people in households making less than $400,000 a year. And the vast majority of that goes to people in the middle, lower, and upper middle income categories. Families of 4 making $80,000 will see a $1,700 tax hike if we don't extend this tax relief. 20 million small businesses will see their rates go up to 43.4%. The child tax credit will be cut in half. The standard deduction will be cut in half. The lowest income earners in America are the ones who are benefiting the most from this legislation today. Republicans are united in our efforts to make this work. Now, one of the things we're focusing on is making the tax cuts permanent. Not only are we focused on extending these policies, but we're committing to make this growth in our economy permanent so we don't have to face these dire consequences in the future. Permanent tax policies promote stability and lead to more pronounced economic effects than temporary ones. Making these tax cuts permanent will provide businesses with the certainty and the stability they need to make the long-term investments that drive growth, accelerate productivity, and increase prosperity across all segments of our economy. Studies find that a permanent extension of the TCJA would increase long-run GDP by 1.1% and increase after-tax income for all Americans of all income levels. Making the small business deduction alone permanent is estimated to create 1.2 million jobs annually over the first 10 years, increasing to 2.4 million jobs in the long run. The President's Council of Economic Advisors just released an analysis that says that extending the Trump tax cuts, combined with other pro-growth economic policies that we are pursuing now, would boost the level of short-run GDP growth by 3.3 to 3.8%, and long-run real GDP growth by 2.6 to 3.2%. Now, what does that mean? It means we're going to see that it will raise annual real wages by $2,100 to $3,300 per worker, increase real annual take-home pay for median income households with 2 children by roughly $4,000 to $5,000, save over 4 million full-time equivalent jobs from being destroyed, and facilitate $100 billion of investment in distressed communities. That analysis also projects that extending these tax cuts, together with the full suite of the Trump administration's policies, such as deregulation, which the CEA previously estimated would add 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points to real GDP growth over a decade, is expected to result in a 3% annual real GDP growth rate over the next 10 years. Now, what does that mean? According to CEA, that 3% growth in our GDP will result in $4.1 trillion of additional revenue to the Treasury to help deal with our national debt. $4.1 trillion. To unleash that growth, the best way to make these tax cuts permanent is by using a current policy baseline. This is the scoring method that more accurately reflects reality. The average American easily understands that there is a difference between a tax increase and a spending cut. However, there's an inherent bias in Congress's scoring process where tax policy is treated different than spending policy. If tax rates are scheduled to increase, like they are right now if we don't act, preventing that tax hike is counted as a cost in uncollected future revenue. But many spending programs are assumed to be extended beyond their expiration, so the spending just continues and continues and continues unabated, which the budget rules say don't have any cost. That's what we're trying to fix today in this bill. In fact, there is $2.5 trillion in spending that is automatically extended by our budget rules over the next 10 years under a current policy baseline that they currently use. Even the Obama White House has used a current policy baseline for tax policy. They recognize that there's a difference between increasing taxes and cutting spending. In 2013, the Obama White House stated that current policy baseline is the appropriate reference point, since it measures changes relative to the status quo, rather than the mix of expiring provisions and policy changes that would likely never be implemented. Interpreted, what they said was exactly what I've been saying. President Obama and his team said, you can't say that just keeping the tax rates where they are and not raising them is the same as spending more money. We need to level the playing field and sever the connection that creates a tax and spend budgeting process in Congress. And that's another thing we're going to do today. Critics who have been strangely silent over the years as trillions of dollars in spending has been automatically extended under a current policy baseline now take offense to correcting that bias toward forcing federal spending. As applied only to tax policy, those critics assert that we'll be increasing the deficit by using a current policy baseline, or we're using this baseline to hide the cost. Let me be very clear. We're not hiding the score that JCT or CBO would assign to the bill under a current law baseline. In fact, I like to see that score. It shows the amount of the tax increase that my colleagues on the other side are trying to push onto the American people. But let's be fully transparent. Both an estimate based on the current policy and one based on the current law will be released when we consider this bill on the Senate floor. And then Americans can see what kind of savings have been given to them by not raising their taxes. Under our current existing tax regime, the revenue to the GDP ratio this year will be about 17.1%. Meaning we will raise taxes for the federal treasury under our current tax policy of about 17.1% of GDP on a current policy baseline. It will also be about the same next year if we don't let the taxes go up, meaning that the revenue will not appreciably change. Yet my colleagues on the other side say it's going to spike a hole in the deficit because, why? Because they won't get their hands on that $4 trillion of new tax revenue out of the American people. This would not increase debt relative to GDP. It would simply prevent a tax increase. And we need to be honest about what those tax increases would and would not do. Those who say we should let taxes go back up say, wow, then we could use it to pay down the national debt some more. Every tax increase that Congress has adopted for as long as I can remember was not used to pay down the national debt. It was used by Congress to spend more money. We've got to take that pressure off of spending as well. Congress does not have a revenue problem. It has a spending problem. Senate Republicans are united in our desire to take concrete steps to address our deficit and get our fiscal house in order. Because the bill we're debating today is within the confines of reconciliation, the scores and numbers that we'll be discussing don't reflect that full fiscal picture. In order to have an honest discussion of what needs to be done, there's an acknowledgement that needs to be made that other factors are also at play that can generate economic growth and reductions in spending. What am I talking about? Economic growth. As I indicated in one of the charts that we just had up, the estimates from the CEA are that if we make the tax policy permanent, the confidence that will give our economy and the boost that it will give our economy in proper tax incentive policy will grow the economy by as much as $4 trillion of new revenue to the federal treasury. The President is also directing impacts in the government through his efforts and the Department of Government Efficiency to aggressively cut waste, fraud, and abuse from our government programs. Spending on federal government programs has ballooned in recent years. We have a responsibility to evaluate these spending increases and ensure that these programs work effectively and efficiently for everyone. The President has also undertaken and will likely pursue more deregulation. Deregulation has had as big an impact on revenues and economic growth as tax policy has in the past, and we should recognize that. The bottom line is that in addition to the action that Congress can take, there are activities that the President is currently engaged in that will impact our fiscal policy by either reducing spending or increasing revenue, and we should also take those into consideration. Congress must begin the process of restoring fiscal sanity by achieving deficit reduction and spending reforms as the best way to achieve that goal. In contrast, imposing the largest tax increase in our country's history would be counterproductive by easing the gliding path and making it easier for more spending. We will have a very robust debate in the weeks ahead about the best way to deliver on President Trump's agenda, and I look forward to those discussions. The budget resolution unlocks the process for us to strengthen our national security, secure our borders, permanently extend the Trump tax cuts, and provide additional middle-class tax relief.